They say wars end when the guns go silent. But for some men, the battle never leaves. 10 years after his last mission, a former Navy SEAL thought he'd left the ghosts behind, until one stormy night, a wounded dog led him back to the fire that never died. What he found wasn't just a secret, it was a second chance to save a life, and maybe his own. If you've ever been through pain or lost your way for a while, stay with us. Subscribe to SEAL Dog Stories, because sometimes a story isn't told to remember. It's told to help us heal. Rain came thin and early, threading the black pines of Maine. Michael Carter guided the service truck down the lakeside maintenance road, wipers metering the dark like a slow heartbeat. He was 48 now, a former Navy SEAL with a face weathered into truth, close-cropped salt at the temples, a pale line of scar slipping from brow to ear, the steadiness of a man who had outlived his noise. 10 years since Afghanistan, 10 years since a blast carved 7 names into him, one of them Ethan Holloway, the best laugh he'd ever known. Back home in Pine Brook, he chose smaller work, the kind that asked for patience instead of glory, gauges, valves, the soft hiss of water choosing a path. He parked at the spillway, cut the engine, let the lake speak. Wet cedar, coal iron, an old coin tang rose under the boards. Nights like this, memory walked beside him. He allowed it a few steps, no more, and bent to the task because numbers never lied, and steel didn't ask why. He was noting pressure when the woods gave him eyes, amber, wide, shaking. A young German shepherd stood at the tree line, ribs working, ash freckling its sable coat, no collar, no tags. The animal barked once, hoarse, urgent, then wheeled and vanished into the dark. Michael did not think. Instinct is just memory that learned to obey. He took his light and followed the thin trail where rain turned soil to breath. Branches whispered across his jacket, needles sighed. The dog appeared ahead, too long in the legs for its age, maybe 7 months, staggering but refusing to quit. It checked on him the way a partner does. Quick glance, keep moving. "All right, kid," he said, voice soft against the trees. "Show me." The ground fell away, then rose again, and the smell arrived before the color, hot, bitter, not only wood, oily sweet, like tar, and something that didn't belong to fire. The trees pulled back, then the night bloomed red. A cabin burned as if anger had found a house. Windows carried orange weather. The porch sagged with heat. The door hung blind in its hinges. The dog skittered through smoke, disappeared, then returned to the entry and cried, a high, breaking sound that reached past training straight into the part of a man that still believes in being useful. Michael wrapped his sleeve over mouth and nose, dipped low, and entered. Inside was motion and grit and a rain of sparks learning to be stars. Photographs lay face down on the floor, one cracked across a smile. He took the hallway by feel and breath, counting seconds the way he'd been taught when seconds were currency. A beam pinned the threshold of a back room. He shouldered it aside and found her, a woman in her early 30s, long dark hair tangled with soot, a flannel overshirt thrown on over a soft tee, jeans torn at one knee, feet black with ash, hands small and work-scarred, a faint tan line at the ring finger. Her face carried the kind of strength that runs out only when the body does. The dog nosed her, wrist and whined apology. "I've got you," Michael said, not to be brave, but to be simple. He lifted her across his shoulders, turned into the heat, and let the dog lead him by the cadence of its bark. Night met him like mercy. Rain stitched his cheeks. He laid her on the wet grass and watched her chest quiet in a way that turned the world narrow, tilted chin, cleared airway, sealed breath. He counted, calm because panic wastes what saves. Her body heaved once, then a cough came from far away, dragging gravel into life. Eyes opened, a burned blue finding shape, light, the outline of a stranger's jaw, in rain. "The dog," she rasped, voice like paper. "Don't leave him." "Not leaving anyone, Bet," he answered. He shrugged off his jacket and wrapped her shoulders, then pressed his radio. The woods ate signal. He tried again, slower. Lakeside maintenance road, cabin fire, one adult female, smoke inhalation, juvenile canine with burns. Static threaded a reply so thin it felt imagined, but it held. He gave the rest. When he looked back, the dog had curled along her leg as if gravity had found its home. "What's your name?" he asked, because names build bridges you can carry people over. She worked the air like it hurt to own. "Elena," she said. "Elena Holloway." The syllables opened a door in him he had kept nailed shut. Holloway. He looked away to steady the ground. "Michael," he said at last. "Michael Carter." He carried her to the truck and made the heater sing. A thermal blanket from the kit went around her like a promise he could keep. Up close, Elena looked like the kind of woman a small town trusts without meeting. A science teacher's patience in the set of her mouth. A volunteer's stubborn in the way her fingers tried to rise, even now, early 30s, freckles smudged beneath smoke. The dog, her dog, hauled itself into the footwell and lay with chin on the rubber mat, eyes fixed on her breath. No collar, no tag, nothing that could be explained to a clerk. "He came for me," Michael said, half to the animal, half to whatever listens when men speak low. Elena's lips shaped a ghost of a nod. "He's good," she whispered. "Smart. Never quits." He believed her. Outside, the cabin threw off a last bright anger that made the rain hiss. The smell worried him. Not just timber, not just paint, something from the wrong shelf of a storeroom. A decade ago, he'd consulted 2 weeks at the old turbine plant up county, enough to learn how solvents hide in air after a leak. Enough for his gut to tug now. He filed it away because a life was breathing in front of him, and that is a man's first mathematics. He radioed again, clearer, slower, patient, as if the signal were a skittish horse. This time dispatch stitched through the static, EMS inbound from Route 7, 15 out. He let the number be and studied the present. Elena's hands trembled under the blanket, not from weather alone. Shock is a winter that doesn't ask the date. He poured water, made her sip, then peeled a space blanket and wrapped the dog because warmth is a language anyone speaks. "You from Pine Brook?" he asked to keep her on the surface of the lake, not sliding under. "Born 2 towns over," she said, breath scraping. "Move here after married." The word found weight and laid it between them. He did not step on it. "I'm sorry," he said. And there was a name echoing under the sentence, a laugh from a tent where men had carved birthdays into stale cake and called it heaven for an hour. She watched his face the way people watch a shoreline after wreckage, careful, almost suspicious of land. "You knew him," she said finally. Not a question. He nodded. "We were kids where kids learn to get old fast." Her eyes softened into a grief that had practice. She looked past him to the line of trees and then to the dog. "I thought I had run out of help," she said, but help had pause. Sirens began as rumor and then learned to be real. Red and white found the trunks and made them blush. He stepped out to signal with the flashlight, the beam rising and falling like a tired arm in church. When he climbed back in, the cab held the quiet that follows the decision not to die. Elena's eyes were closing in the way a body asks permission. He touched her shoulder lightly, and she woke to the touch like a swimmer who chooses the surface again. "Stay with me," he said. "Just a little." The dog thumped its tail once against the mat. Michael let his hand rest on its neck and felt the stubborn heat there, the simple mathematics of loyalty. Somewhere far behind him, the lake breathed, patient as a judge who has seen every kind of man and still waits for the sentence that mends. Michael looked at the woman he had carried from fire and at the animal that had found him in the trees. "All right," he murmured, to them, to himself, to the night that had brought them together by the old arithmetic of need. "This time I won't be late." And the rain, small and honest, kept stitching the world back into one piece. The corridor smells of cooled smoke and antiseptic. The night's sirens are gone, but the hum of machines lingers like rain that refuses to stop. Elena wakes to a ceiling the color of unpolished bone, to sheets that rasp softly against bandaged skin. She is 36, narrow-shouldered, hair the brown of wet bark gathered into a loose, clumsy knot by someone who cared more for speed than beauty. Her gown hangs light as paper, and the air carries a taste of metal. When she blinks, the world steadies, a drip chamber, a monitor, a plastic pitcher half full. Her voice refuses her, so her eyes do the speaking, wide, stunned, then guarded as if memory itself were a fire to be handled with gloves. A nurse leans in with the hush of practiced kindness, but Elena's gaze shifts past her to the doorway where a man stands without entering, cap in hand, shoulders squared because they have been trained to be. Michael Carter, 48, beard flecked with iron, storm-gray eyes that have learned to keep distance, boots polished out of habit, not vanity. He doesn't step closer. He watches how breath returns to a person who has outrun night. Between them a silence installs itself, shy but insistent. The nurse murmurs Elena's name, confirms the basics, no spinal injury, smoke inhalation, minor burns, dehydration, and asks if anyone should be called. The name that lights behind the nurse's question belongs to a man who no longer answers. Ethan. Elena's lips tremble. She turns her face to the window where morning lifts slow over the parking lot, pale as a kept promise. Michael feels the name arrive without being spoken. He feels it like an old key finding its lock. His hand tightens on that cap the way a diver grips rope, before going under, then releases because pain belongs to the body, but guilt belongs to the soul. The doctor enters with quiet authority, a woman in her 50s with silvering hair braided neatly, badge clipped to a navy cardigan, eyes that measure suffering and return it in clean, understandable words. "Dr. Patel," she says, and offers Elena water in a cup with a straw that bends like a reed. She explains injuries first, then the shape of the night, the blaze's temperature, the pattern of spread, the way the smoke marked the walls. Her tone never rises, but the facts do. Accelerant, multiple points of ignition. This was not a stove, not a spark. This was someone's decision. Through the open door, a German shepherd lies with his chin on his paws, coat dark gold singed to dull at the tips, ribs lifting and falling in the measured fatigue of a runner who finished the race because none else could. The collarless dog's eyes are a worn amber, steady, sorrowful, sure. "Ranger," Dr. Patel adds gently, "is why you are here to be angry or grateful." He wouldn't leave the doorway, led first responders right in. Elena's lashes clump with saline and smoke. She reaches her hand, and the dog answers with a small thump of his tail, the kind that says, "I know the route back." Michael's breath finds the old narrow place between duty and regret. In the dog's stare, he recognizes something untrained and holy, the refusal to abandon. He steps to the threshold, not farther. Elena sees him full now, the beard he trims when he remembers, the creases bracketed by years of desert sun and ocean wind, the jacket whose elbows shine from work, not wealth. She knows his name before the nurse says it. It arrives on the same air as Ethan's laugh from a decade ago. Michael, the one who came home when the others didn't, the one whose survival became a question she could not ask without damaging the room around her. Their eyes hold longer than is safe for two people with a shared grave between them. She lifts the corner of the sheet the way a person lifts a page. The smallest, most ordinary movements feel like diplomacy with fate. "Rest," Dr. Patel says, and she leaves them a quiet that neither is brave enough to fill. Before noon, the paperwork begins to stack like driftwood. Forms and signatures, photocopied identities, the language of systems that keep people alive by counting. Michael stands where walls meet, answering what he can, declining what he must. He says "ma'am" when it is not required, and "thank you" when it is not expected. Some habits are better than prayers. Ranger sleeps with his body pressed against the door jamb, an unposted guard. A volunteer brings a bowl of water. The dog drinks without noise, then lifts his head to watch the hall as if it could confess. Michael kneels, palm to the dog's shoulder, feeling the tremor that follows any night of flames. "You did good," he says, voice low enough that only the animal's heart can hear it. In the room, Elena turns on her side and faces the window. The glass gives back a faint reflection. A woman, tired and alive. The black smear of soot at the hairline, like a mark from a past that will not sign the release. By late afternoon, clouds stack over the hospital like folded quilts. The nurse changes the IV bag. Dr. Patel returns with a grief that wears professional clothing. "We've run the lab," she says. "Residues confirm accelerant." She doesn't say the rest out loud, but everyone hears it. Someone wanted the night to end differently. Elena's mouth finds shape, 2 syllables formed with tenderness and alarm. "Why, who?" But the answers are not for this hour. Michael nods as if saluting a verdict. Something in him, rank, training, or simply the long practice of breathing through ruin, organizes the terror into steps. Stay with the living, memorize the room, leave when leaving, protects. He takes his cap again. Ranger rises, shakes out the ash from his coat, and follows as if a string had been tied between them while neither was looking. Evening sets its palm against the windows. Michael stops at the nurse's station, signs where the line tells him to, and says he will check. Back tomorrow. He means it, and he fears it. The automatic doors open with a sigh, and the cold walks in. Outside, the parking lot smells like rain, remembering gasoline. Michael starts the truck, an old Ford that speaks in clicks before agreeing to work. Headlights paint the low mist into ropes. He drives slow. He has always driven slow when leaving hospitals. At the second turn, a blur breaks from the shadow. Ranger, sprinting, pad slapping wet asphalt, breath dragging a ribbon of steam. The dog does not bark until he reaches the door. Then he gives a single sound, a knock in the language of animals. He rises, puts both forepaws against the metal with a soft, desperate thud. Michael brakes hard. The truck idles with a steady, mechanical empathy. For a breath, Michael only watches the dog in the mirror, as if this might be a test of faith. Remain still, and the world will choose for you. Ranger's claws scritch down the door again, the sound of insistence, not panic. In the glass, Michael sees his own face superimposed upon the dog's. 2 survivors, asking the same brief question, to whom do I belong now? He shifts to park. Rain stipples the windshield in a pattern that reminds him of the desert's brief storms, how water can arrive like forgiveness where it has no business. He opens the door. The night comes in on a wind that smells of pine and diesel, and Ranger presses close, eyes bright as wet coins in the truck's beam. Michael sets his palm to the dog's chest and feels the engine there, rapid and determined. He lowers his voice until it is nearly a thought, until only the ear built for loyalty can hold it. "All right, buddy," he says, and the words taste like surrender. That is also a beginning. Guess I'm not done saving people. Morning thinned like pale gauze over Pine Brook. Rain smell clung to the streets, and a dog's breath fogged the glass where he waited, patient as a worn prayer. Elena arrived with the hush of someone who has not slept. 36, narrow-shouldered, hair the brown of wet bark, pulled into a practical knot, she wore a charcoal sweater under a borrowed coat and carried a folder scorched at the corners. Her voice, low and steady, had the grit of ash in it. Michael stood by the counter of his small kitchen, pine boards, a chipped enamel kettle, and watched steam rise as if memories had a temperature. 48, beard salted by years, he moved with the deliberation of someone who used to count exits before he counted friends. Ranger settled by the door, head on paws, amber eyes tracking both of them as if their decision were a bird he didn't dare startle. "I thought the fire was the end of it," Elena said softly, placing the folder down. It wasn't. The paper smelled faintly of smoke. The metal clip had blistered. Michael didn't sit. He had learned to hear standing. Inside the folder, maps unfolded like secrets. Elena touched them with careful fingers, each page a step back into something she wished had never begun. "Crestfall Energy," she said, and the name felt industrial in the mouth, heavy as a valve. "The plant's been running hot since spring. Not enough surface water to keep the turbines in range, so they tapped a forgotten line. This." She pointed to a gray thread on an old blueprint stamped with a military crest, faded to a ghost. An auxiliary well from a decommissioned site out by Ridge Hollow. Cold, deep, fast. It used to carry coolant for missile storage, banned chemicals. The word hung between them. Michael's hands, scarred, reliable, closed lightly on the map's edges to stop its trembling. "Discharge?" he asked, voice quiet. Elena nodded. Back into the lake, the same lake that feeds the town pipes. She drew a breath that sounded like someone learning to speak again. "I tried to flag it, pulled logs, took samples. Someone noticed. 2 nights later my house burned. Files I hadn't duplicated are gone." Ranger shifted, a small sound in his throat, as if he knew flames had the shape of erasure. Michael poured coffee they didn't drink. Outside, the woods held their winter color, dark and honest. "How sure are you?" he asked, not because he doubted her, but because the world requires numbers before it believes pain. Elena slid a photo across the table, a corroded junction, gaskets stained an unnatural green-blue. Another photo, a handheld meter blinking readings that didn't belong in drinking water. "This is from the ridge line," she said. "I could smell the cold coming out of the casing. It's not just groundwater." Her jaw tightened, then released, like someone refusing an old anger. "And listen, my neighbor saw a white pickup idling down the block the night before. The fire. Unmarked. The driver wore a cap, sat low." Michael cataloged each detail the way he used to catalog wind and distance. He felt the old habits return, not the rush of adrenaline, but the slow architecture of readiness. "Your house was more than a home," he said. "It was a file cabinet." She met his eyes without flinching. "Someone thought if they burned my life, they could burn the truth with it." The kettle clicked off. The room exhaled. Ranger rose and leaned lightly against Michael's knee, a warm weight, a signal, move. They drove to the ridge as the light lifted. Frost laced the grass, and the ruts on the service road were half filled with last night's rain. Elena narrated the landscape like a map-maker who had been made to justify the existence of land. She spoke of chain-link fences patched with newer wire, of a locked panel whose hinges wore fresh scratches, of the way the air changed 10 feet from the old wellhead, colder, metallic, like a coin on the tongue. Michael walked the perimeter in slow arcs, reading sign, boot marks with a lug pattern not sold at the hardware store, a blister of blackened earth where someone had burned something small and paper-bound, the oily film that slurred a puddle's surface into gasoline colors. "They're careful," he said, "but nobody's perfect when they move at night." He knelt, touching the soil the way you touch the back of a child's hand, with respect for what it holds. Ranger sniffed, ears lifting, tail still, a point gentle and certain. Under a mat of needles, Michael found a twist of blue plastic with numbers stamped into it, a tag from a drum torn by a hurried hand. He didn't smile. Confirmation is not joy. On the lake's edge, the wind wore the smell of algae too early for the season. A gull cried, and it sounded like a door not quite closing. Elena stood with her arms wrapped around herself and looked at the water she had trusted all her life. "People soak their coffee makers in this," she said, voice thin with a fear she wouldn't let own her. "Grandparents rinse apples for grandkids in this." Michael watched the ripple of small waves break and return, break and return. In that cadence he heard the years since Afghanistan, grief arriving in sets, endless but survivable if you remembered to breathe between them. "Who else knows?" he asked. "No one I trust," she answers. "I tried internal compliance. The email bounced to legal. 2 hours later, I got a calendar invite with no sender." She shrugged a small, tired shrug. "I didn't open it." A good decision can feel like loss. Ranger nosed her hand, then looked up the slope toward the line of cottonwoods where a deer path stitched the hill. Elena nodded, as if the dog had made an argument she could accept. They returned to the truck, mud soft around the tires. The dashboard hummed the way old machines confess their years. Michael rested his hands on the wheel and studied the keys as if they translated something he needed to say. He had sworn off missions that didn't wear a flag. He had promised himself he would only fix things with wrenches and pressure gauges and the quiet competence of a man who knows when to leave. But here was a woman he owed without owing. A town that did not even know it was thirsty for mercy. A dog whose eyes did not complicate truth with excuses. "Maybe fate didn't give up on us yet," Elena said, so softly the sentence might have been afraid to exist. Michael let the silence hold a beat, then two. "Some answers are better if you let them find their own temperature." "Then let's not waste it," he replied. He looked at Ranger. The dog's ears tipped forward, then relaxed. Agreement, canine and complete. They spent the afternoon building a plan that felt like a bridge built from memory and wire. Elena would copy what remained, off-site, on drives she could tuck into ordinary objects, flour tins, a spare air filter, the hollow behind a drawer. Michael would walk the plant the way a contractor does, collecting the unremarkable, delivery schedules, subcontractor badges, the rhythm of guard rounds. They would speak to no one unless necessity bared its teeth. If Crestfall was drawing from the old system, there would be invoices somewhere, a truck that had to be washed, a signature practiced into invisibility. "We don't need to catch a corporation," Michael said. "Just a person who forgot that every secret is a thing someone lifts and carries." Dusk gathered on the porch as he spoke. He felt the years align in him, not the soldier's appetite for risk, but the veteran's patience, the knowledge that endurance, not force, turns the wheel. Elena watched his face as if measuring whether it would hold both past and present without breaking. It did not break. "Thank you," she said. The words were small and exact. They did not borrow from tomorrow. Night settled like a quilt the town had shared for generations. Michael walked Elena to her car, an older sedan with a child seat long since removed, the imprint of it faint on the upholstery, like a memory that learned to sleep. He checked her taillights because that is what decent men do when the world has been unkind. Ranger sat on the porch and followed the red glow as it drifted down the road, then turned his head to Michael with a quiet question. "We go careful," Michael told him. He closed the door to the house, then reopened it to let the night back in. Cool, honest, smelling of pine and distant water. He placed Elena's scorched folder in a drawer where he kept letters he could not answer and dog tags he no longer touched. He set his hand flat on the wood and felt the grain pass under his palm, alive, patient. "All right," he said to the room, to the dog, to the lake, to the friend buried 10 years in another country. "We'll carry this." Ranger came close and leaned the way dogs lend weight when words aren't enough. In the window, the dark held their reflection. A man, a dog, and the thin line of resolve between them, bright as a filament that no longer fears the switch. Rain thickened through the trees, a slow percussion on leaves and tin. Beneath it, the forest held its breath, as if listening for those who no longer belonged above ground. Michael moved first, flashlight angled low, boots sinking in mud that smelled of rust and memory. Elena followed, shoulders squared beneath a borrowed rain jacket too large for her frame, the hood clinging to wet strands of auburn hair. Ranger went ahead, nose low, tail level. A soldier's gait in a body born for loyalty, they stopped where the earth rose into a concrete mouth half swallowed by moss. A forgotten access shaft. Michael ran his palm across the corroded door, feeling old patterns of rivets that once spelled his youth in a desert far away. "This design," he whispered, mostly to himself. "It's military." The rain made no comment. He pried the latch with a crowbar until the hinges moaned, a long, low confession, and they stepped into the dark. The air inside was damp, with the scent of coolant and dusted iron. Light from the flashlight touched pipes overhead, thick as limbs, each labeled with numbers that meant nothing to civilians, but everything to men like Michael. Elena traced a line of stenciled text, T-79, auxiliary flow. "They didn't build this for turbines," she murmured. Her voice echoed once, then broke against the walls. Michael's breath grew slower. The rhythm of the place stirred something old. "No," he said. "This is a transfer conduit. Same pattern they used in Kabul 20 years ago. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from recognition. Ranger padded forward, claws clicking in a cadence that sounded like a heartbeat extended through metal. The corridor narrowed until their shoulders brushed concrete on either side, and the flashlight beam caught a sign eaten by mold. Authorized personnel only. "Looks like we're qualified," Elena said, her small attempt at humor trembling into the silence. He half smiled. "Not anymore." They reached a junction where the pipes widened into a service chamber. Old terminals blinked faintly, running on backup power that hummed like a trapped fly. Michael wiped a layer of grime from a steel cabinet. Beneath it, the Crestfall logo gleamed faintly under dust, a serpent coiled around a drop of water. "Here's your company," he said. Elena crouched beside a console, pressing keys that resisted like teeth. Screens stuttered to life. Grainy menus, timestamps from decades past. Among them, a folder labeled Thermal Human Reactivity Trials. Michael froze. The title dragged his mind through sand and sirens to the day fire turned his uniform to a flag of smoke. "Don't open that," he said quietly. Elena met his gaze, steady, searching, and opened it. The screen filled with black and white footage, soldiers in a desert compound, out of V-lines, threading their arms, heat sensors glowing along their spines. Then, an explosion. 7 silhouettes disappeared in light. The camera shook, then steadied on one survivor crawling through ash, his face half covered but unmistakable. Michael's. He stepped back, the flashlight slipping in his hand. Elena whispered, "It wasn't your fault." Her hand hovered near his arm, not quite touching. They moved their sin here. The sound came before the light, a low whine, then red strobe slicing the dark. Alarm. Somewhere above, machinery woke like a beast remembering hunger. Ranger barked once, sharp and clean. "We've got company," Michael said. He yanked a breaker switch, plunging half the tunnel into blackness. The sirens faltered, uncertain in their own echo. "Follow him," he ordered. Elena didn't argue. The dog led, sure-footed, even blind, weaving through the skeleton of the underground like he'd memorized it in another life. Sparks leapt from a live wire overhead, and the air smelled of ozone and burnt oil. They moved fast, ducking beneath conduits, their breath loud as confession. Behind them, footsteps. Maybe human, maybe recorded memory, chased but never caught. The flashlight beam flickered, died, and they ran by touch, by instinct, by the pulse of fear and faith that beats the same in all creatures that want to live. At the final turn, Ranger stopped. A metal grate blocked their way, locked with a corroded latch. Michael slammed his shoulder against it once, twice. Nothing. "Back up," he muttered, pulling a wrench from his belt. He pried. Metal screamed, then gave. Cold air rushed in, smelling of rain and pine. They burst out onto a slope overlooking the lake. The storm had thickened into a curtain. Lightning stitched the clouds in white thread. Behind them, the tunnel mouth exhaled smoke tinted with blue fire. Elena bent over, coughing, clutching the scorched folder to her chest. Michael looked down at his hands, black with oil, and something older. The footage looped in his head, not as evidence, but as absolution denied. Elena reached for him, her palm trembling. "You saw it, didn't you?" she said. "They used you." He nodded once, the motion barely human. "We were the test," he said. "They called it regeneration under heat stress. I called it losing my brothers." Thunder rolled like distant artillery. Ranger shook water from his coat and pressed close to Michael's leg, his fur carrying the smell of iron and rain. The world around them felt both smaller and larger, one secret replacing another. "We have to expose this," Elena said. Her voice carried both defiance and grief. "People need to know what Crestfall really is." Michael stared at the lake, where reflections of lightning fractured and reformed over and over. "Truth costs," he murmured. "Always does." Then softer, "But we'll pay it." He looked at her, and for a moment the lines of time between them blurred, the widow, the soldier, the dog who had walked through both fires. The rain didn't stop. It only learned to fall quieter, like respect. They stood together until the alarms were distant memory, until the world's noise returned to the ordinary, rain on metal, breath in lungs. The faint hiss of cooling circuits far below. Somewhere under their feet, a video kept looping. 7 men walking into light, 1 walking out. Michael turned his face upward, letting the rain wash soot from his skin. "It ends here," he said. Not as hope, but as command. Elena nodded, holding the folder tighter. Ranger barked once, a sound that seemed to carry both warning and promise. They started down the hill toward the truck, 3 silhouettes against the storm, leaving behind the sins of science and the ghosts of soldiers. Wind dragged the rain sideways, stitching silver lines across the dark. The trampled grass led them to an old pump station, its roof sagging like a bowed head, its windows glazed with years of neglect. Inside, the air smelled of wet iron and oil long settled into concrete. Michael set his flashlight on a rusted valve wheel, its beam spread thinly, touching walls scrawled with old safety codes and spiderwebs that trembled in the draft. Elena slipped off her soaked jacket and wrung it out over the floor, her breath visible in the cold. She was pale from exhaustion, a woman made of sinew and determination more than flesh. Ranger lay near the door, chest heaving slow, the pads of his paws streaked with mud. The hum of distant thunder rolled through the pipes above, like ghosts still doing their work. Michael crouched beside a cracked panel and pried it open, finding only dust and a pair of dry batteries corroded to ash. "This will hold till morning," he said. Elena nodded, sitting on a broken bench. Her eyes were rimmed red from both rain and everything heavier than rain. Minutes stretched thin. The flashlight flickered, then steadied. From her coat, Elena drew something wrapped in torn fabric. A letter, edges singed, writing half lost to flame. She turned it in her hands as though it might crumble under breath alone. "I found this in the cabin debris," she said quietly. "It has your name." She offered it like a confession. Michael stared. His name, to Michael, survived in black ink, smudged but legible. His heart stuttered once, as if pulled from the past into the damp room. "Go on," he whispered. Elena unfolded it, her fingers trembling with reverence, and read aloud, her voice low, hesitant, but sure enough to make the words live again. "If I don't come back, tell Mike he did everything right. He was the heart of our team. If he ever blames himself, tell him he was worth saving." The paper fluttered in her hands as wind squeezed through the cracked doorway. Michael's throat closed around 10 years of silence. He bowed his head, elbows on knees, palms pressed together not in prayer, but surrender. The storm's rhythm filled the gap where words might have been. Michael looked at the floor until it blurred, tears mixing with rain that had dripped from his hair. His voice came out like gravel, turning into riverbed. 10 years, I thought I was the one who should have died. His shoulders trembled once, then went still. Elena folded the letter and set it beside him, her face softening in the dim light. "And I thought you did," she said. "Maybe we've both been ghosts since then." The words settled between them, not accusation, not forgiveness, but something rawer, closer to truth. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching. He crossed the short distance between them and rested his muzzle on Michael's palm, warm and heavy, anchoring him to the present. Michael exhaled, a shudder that felt like the first breath of someone waking. "He always wrote letters," he murmured. "Said one day paper would outlive us all." Elena smiled faintly. "Maybe it has." Outside, lightning veined the sky in white. The water dripped steadily from a rusted pipe into a puddle, echoing the slow heartbeat of the shelter. Michael leaned back against the wall, the cold seeping through his jacket, but it felt earned. "He was better than me," he said. "Braver." Elena shook her head. "He followed you, Mike. That's not weakness." Her voice carried both conviction and tenderness, shaped by the years she'd learned to survive alone. He turned to her, eyes red, tired, but finally open. "You hate me," he said, almost as if he needed to hear it spoken to deserve it. She hesitated, then shook her head. No, I hated the war for taking him, but now I see it took both of you." She reached for the letter again and tucked it into her pocket. Maybe it's time we let it stop taking. They sat in silence, the kind that doesn't need words because everything has already been said once in another lifetime. Ranger stretched, laid his head between his paws, and sighed. That deep canine sound that forgives what humans cannot. The storm eased, rain became mist, thunder faded to a far hum. Michael watched Elena trace the seams of her sleeve, the smallest act of someone sewing herself back together. "He called me worth saving," he said, voice quiet. "I don't know if I believe that." Elena looked up. "Then start by saving something else. Maybe that's how you'll learn." She gestured toward the folder near his pack, still holding their proof against Crestfall. "We finish this. For him." Michael nodded slowly, every motion deliberate. "For him," he echoed. He glanced at Ranger, whose amber eyes caught the light just right, turning them almost gold. "And for anyone still drinking from that lake." A smile ghosted at the edge of Elena's lips. "You sound like a man with a purpose again." He let the compliment rest. Purpose, he thought, was just another word for staying when you could leave. He took the letter, folded it with care, and slid it into his jacket pocket, close to his chest, above the old scar that still woke him some nights. When the storm finally broke into drizzle, Michael rose, stretched his back, and looked through a cracked window toward the faint line of dawn. The clouds were bruised but thinning. He felt the air shift, cleaner, quieter. Ranger stood, shook himself, and came to heel. Elena pulled her coat on again, movement stiff but steady. "Morning's coming," she said. "It always does," Michael replied. He placed a hand on Ranger's neck and whispered, "Ready?" The dog's tail brushed his leg once, a small promise of yes. They stepped outside together into the pale rain. The shelter behind them smelled of oil and closure, the kind of place that would soon forget them. Michael paused, once more looking back at the shadows where they had sat, two humans and a dog, sharing ghosts. Then he faced forward. The mud took their footprints without complaint. Somewhere deep in his pocket, the letter pressed warm against his heart, and he thought maybe that was what forgiveness really felt like. Not loud, not final, but alive. Dawn rose cold and colorless, mist clinging to the valley like unspoken guilt. The world felt suspended, quiet, waiting, as if even the wind held its breath before judgment. By the time they reached the outskirts of Pinebrook, the sky had settled into pewter gray. The dam loomed ahead, half shrouded in fog, its spillway humming with the low resonance of something too large to care about human lives. Michael parked the truck under the cover of a skeletal pine and killed the lights. Elena sat beside him, the glow of her phone faint against her tired face. The message blinked one last time. They're opening the floodgate tonight. The sender, a young engineer she'd once mentored, had taken the risk knowing Crestfall's surveillance net could erase more than jobs. She locked the screen and exhaled, a breath that sounded like surrender's cousin. 2,000 people, she murmured. Children, families, they'll never even know. Michael adjusted his jacket, checked the sidearm he hadn't wanted to use again, and said, "Then we make sure they never have to." Ranger, seated behind them, gave a low, almost human sound. Not a growl, not a whine, but a vow. They followed the old maintenance road around the dam's perimeter, moving through the drizzle and the hum of power lines that buzzed like angry wasps. The smell of ozone and oil hung in the air. Elena's breath came quick, visible in the cold. "You used to build things," she said quietly, "not break them." Michael didn't look at her. Sometimes you've got to break the right thing to keep what's worth building. His words were steady, but his pulse betrayed him. Ranger moved ahead, tail down, ears sharp, guiding them along the path until the concrete colossus of the control building rose through the mist, a monument to ambition without conscience. A single floodlight cut the fog in a clean white blade, slicing across the access deck. Michael crouched, studying the rhythm of the rotating light. Years of training returned like muscle memory wearing new skin. We've got 90 seconds between sweeps, he said. After that, we're ghosts. Elena smiled faintly. That used to be your specialty. Still is, he said. Inside the dam was a cathedral of machinery. Massive turbines standing like saints of industry, wires coiled like veins. Every drip of condensation echoed through the hall. Michael led the way to the auxiliary control panel, dust-covered but alive, its screen flickering with data streams. Elena started typing commands with the same instinct she once used to file reports, each keystroke another rebellion. They rerouted the purge valves, she muttered. It's not maintenance, it's release. Her fingers flew faster. They're set to dump everything into the valley. Michael scanned the schematic. If we override from here, they'll know. If we don't, people die. The truth needed no debate. He took position by the door, keeping watch, his body angled between her and the world. Outside, thunder cracked, too soon for the weather, too precise for chance. Headlights flared through the rain, cutting across the lower platform. They're here, he said. The figure that emerged from the dark wore authority like a second skin. Brent Collier, tall, mid-40s, face hard as steel, eyes sharp with something colder than anger. His tactical coat bore the crestfall insignia over an old military patch. "Michael Graves," he called out, voice carrying easily above the storm. "Didn't think ghosts drove trucks." Michael stepped from the doorway, calm but ready. "Didn't think traitors got promoted." Brent laughed once, short and humorless. "You still think this is about heroes and villains? You couldn't save your men then. You won't save this town now." The words landed like blows Michael had already rehearsed in nightmares. He steadied his breathing. "You're right," he said softly. "This time, I'll save it for them." The silence that followed was pure and lethal. Brent raised his pistol, rain streamed down his sleeve like quicksilver. Ranger moved before thought could form, a blur of fur and muscle lunging between them. The gunshot cracked, echoing off the dam's walls. Elena screamed. The dog's body hit the concrete, sliding into Michael's legs. For a heartbeat, time collapsed. Ranger's eyes found his, wide and bright, asking for nothing. Michael's training dissolved into something older, rawer. He fired once, clean and controlled. Brent staggered, clutching his shoulder, but still aimed again. Michael didn't wait. He crossed the distance with a single motion, wrested the gun aside, and slammed the breaker lever down. Sparks exploded from the control box. Alarms howled. "Elena," he shouted. "Manual override. Now." She sprinted to the console, blood on her hands that wasn't hers, and keyed in the sequence. On the central monitor, digital gates shifted. Main outflow, reverse diversion, engaged. The dam groaned like a wounded animal. Outside, the floodgates split open with a roar that shook the world. Black water, thick with chemical sludge, surged toward the waste valley instead of the town. Brent stumbled backward, eyes wide as the realization struck him. "You'll drown it all," he spat. Michael's voice was flat. "Better the dead soil than living children." The flood came fast, an avalanche of dark. Michael grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her toward the service ladder. Brent lunged, desperate, reaching for the pistol lost in the chaos. The current burst through a ruptured wall, sweeping him into the torrent. For an instant, his silhouette flailed against the white foam, then vanished beneath it. Michael didn't watch him go. Some ghosts earn their silence. They climbed until the world narrowed to breath and rain, until they collapsed on the upper deck, under the first light of dawn. Ranger lay motionless where they'd left him. Michael crawled to him on trembling hands, the cold steel biting his knees. "Hey, buddy." His voice broke, soft as a prayer undone. Elena knelt beside them, her face streaked with soot and tears. The rain fell harder, washing blood into rust-colored puddles. Ranger's tail moved once more, barely, and then rested. Michael pressed his forehead to the dog's flank, feeling the last warmth fade beneath his hand. No words could hold that kind of silence, so none were offered. Elena placed the folded letter from Ethan beside the dog's paw. "He saved us," she whispered. "Again." When the first sunlight reached the dam, it painted everything gold: the ruins, the smoke, the bodies, the living. Michael rose slowly, soaked, hollowed, but alive. He looked down at the water below, still dark but moving away, carrying its poison toward the barren lands. He did what soldiers do, he said. He followed orders. Mine. Elena touched his arm, gentle. And maybe that's what saved all of us. He nodded once. The wind carried the smell of rain and burnt wire, but beneath it lingered something purer, the faint scent of pine and morning. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost. He looked toward the horizon and whispered, "Rest easy, Ranger. We'll take it from here." Smoke mingled with rain, drifting low across the broken dam like a shroud. The world burned and drowned at the same time, caught between fire and water, between endings and the faint outline of grace. Michael stumbled through the wreckage, arms locked around Ranger's limp body. The dog's fur was soaked with blood and ash, heavy against his chest. Each step felt like lifting both the past and the punishment that came with it. Elena followed close behind, coughing through the smoke, her face streaked with soot and rain. The dam groaned beneath them, a wounded giant, its concrete veins still bleeding water. Far below, black currents churned where Brent had disappeared. The air smelled of oil, ozone, and iron. Michael dropped to his knees beside the emergency console, slamming the radio switch again and again. Only static replied, the white noise of heaven's refusal. "Come on," he rasped. "Somebody." Nothing. He looked down. Ranger's chest rose shallow, each breath a whisper. The old soldier pressed his hand against the fur, as if he could will life back through sheer stubbornness. "Stay with me, boy. Please." Elena knelt beside them, shaking. Her hair clung to her face, eyes wide with grief that had nowhere to go. "Please, God, if there's any mercy left," her voice cracked, swallowed by the storm. For a moment the only sound was rain hammering metal, relentless and uncaring. Then, faintly, impossibly, came another sound. A bell, one slow, hollow toll, rolling through the valley. Then another. Then another. Michael froze. The tone was deep, resonant, familiar. Not church bells from the town, but the emergency signal system he had once jury-rigged years ago when Pine Brook's infrastructure was still under his watch. He'd connected the old church's bell to the town's crisis alert grid after a lightning strike disabled the sirens. It was meant as a last resort, a signal no one could ignore. He turned toward the sound, the echo threading through the mist like a voice calling from long ago. "That's the bell," he whispered. "Someone heard us." Across the valley, through rain and smoke, the faint gleam of headlights appeared. First one, then several, cutting through the fog like slow-moving stars. Rescue vehicles, Pine Brook's volunteer crew. Michael could almost see the faces now. Men and women he'd passed in the market, people who'd never known his name. He looked back at Ranger. The dog's ears twitched faintly, one paw flexing as if reaching toward the sound. "You hear that, buddy?" he murmured. "They're coming." Elena pressed her sleeve against her eyes, crying without sound. "He's still fighting!" The rain washed over them in sheets, turning everything to glimmering gray. Michael adjusted his grip, cradling Ranger closer. "Hold on, he said. "You didn't just save this town. You brought them here." Minutes folded into an eternity, the rumble of rotor blades grew from a faint vibration into a full, roaring presence. The helicopter appeared through the haze, searchlight slicing across the dam's ruins. Over the headset speaker clipped to his collar, a voice crackled. "This is Pine Brook Rescue 1. We see you. Hold position." Relief hit Michael like impact. Elena waved both arms, tears streaming down her soot-blackened cheeks, the downwash from the chopper-whipped rain sideways. It mixed with fire's dying embers, creating a surreal snowfall of orange and silver. Michael shielded Ranger with his body as two medics descended on harness lines. Their shouts were lost under the wind, but their hands were steady, practiced. "We've got him," one said. "And the dog. We'll take them both." Michael hesitated, unwilling to let go. Ranger's breathing was barely there, his fur still warm against the cold. Elena touched Michael's shoulder. "He wants you to trust them." Slowly, he nodded. They lifted Ranger onto a stretcher. His paw twitched once when Michael whispered something close to his ear, words too quiet for anyone else to hear. When the chopper rose again, Michael and Elena remained kneeling on the dam, staring after it. The storm began to thin. The sun broke through in shards, turning the mist to gold. The bell still rang faintly in the distance, its rhythm slower now, as if the valley itself was breathing again. Elena looked at him. "You wired that system yourself, didn't you?" Michael nodded. "Back when nobody thought the old bell was worth fixing," she smiled, weary but luminous. "Guess it still remembers your hands." He looked down at his palms, scraped, bloodied, but steady, and gave a small, tired laugh. "Maybe some things don't forget who built them." The helicopters faded toward the horizon, taking with them the sound of rotors and beating hearts. Michael sat back against the cracked barrier, eyes on the valley below. He could see houses in the distance, lights flickering on as dawn broke, families unaware how close they'd come to disappearing. Elena sat beside him, knees pulled close, silent. The world smelled of wet stone and smoke, but beneath it was something cleaner, petrichor, and the faint sweetness of pine. He whispered, almost to himself, "Ethan, we did it." For the first time, saying his friend's name didn't hurt. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes closed. "You think Ranger will make it?" she asked softly. "He's stronger than both of us," Michael said. "But even if he doesn't—" He stopped, then smiled faintly. "He'll still find his way home." They stayed until the rescue crews reached the site, their lights dancing across the dam's surface. As medics hurried forward, one stopped to salute Michael. A small gesture that said everything words couldn't. He nodded back, quiet gratitude in his eyes. Elena stood, brushing mud from her coat. "What now?" she asked. Michael looked at the sunrise, pale and trembling. "Now we start over," he said. "Maybe tell the truth. Maybe just live." His voice softened. "Either way, we keep ringing that bell." When they finally walked away, the church bell sounded one last time across the valley. Not warning now, but remembrance. And somewhere between the echoes and the wind, Michael thought he could hear Ranger's bark carried with it, strong and steady, answering from the sky. Autumn sunlight lay soft over Pine Brook, turning the lake to gold. The air smelled of cedar and the faint sweetness of dry leaves, an ordinary day wrapped in peace, the kind that once felt impossible. A year had passed since the flood and the fire. The dam stood rebuilt, its warning bell newly polished, a symbol of what was lost and what was mended. Crestfall Energy no longer existed. Its name, once printed on the metal gate by the main road, had been replaced by a simple wooden sign that read, Pine Brook Memorial Park. Every weekend, families came to walk the trails where soldiers once fought shadows only they could see. Near the waterline stood a stone monument carved with careful hands. Michael often paused before it. The engraving read, "To those who fought unseen wars, and to those who kept fighting when it was over." Beneath it, two names gleamed faintly in the sunlight, Ethan Holloway and Michael Carter. He never asked for that addition, but Elena insisted. "You both saved this place," she'd said. He smiled at the memory now, feeling no pride, only gratitude that the names stood together, one for the past, one for what came after. Their life had reshaped itself quietly. Elena's hair had grown longer, streaked with silver that glimmered in morning light. She still carried a calm resilience, but there was laughter in her voice now, an ease earned, not inherited. Together they had founded the Holloway Carter Rescue Center, a haven for veterans and abandoned dogs alike. The building sat on a hill overlooking the valley, its walls painted white with blue trim. Every morning a chorus of barks echoed as volunteers opened kennels. Many of the men who came there were ghosts of their own wars, men who found it easier to talk to dogs than to people. Michael understood them in ways words could not. "You don't fix a soldier," he often said. "You just give him something worth guarding again." Elena would smile at that, wiping her hands on her coat. "Then you've already done it." Under the porch, Ranger lay stretched across the wooden planks, his muzzle now gray, eyes soft and amber. He no longer chased storms or sirens, just sunlight. Children from town would sometimes kneel beside him, whispering secrets as if he were the keeper of something sacred. He listened, always. Scars beneath his fur told their own story, but his breathing was steady, content. When Michael sat beside him, the dog would rest his head on his boot, the same gesture he'd made years ago in that ruined desert. Some bonds don't fade, they just grow quieter. That evening, as dusk bled into amber, Michael sat on the porch steps holding an old envelope between calloused fingers. The paper had yellowed, the edges curled from time. Ethan's letter. He unfolded it carefully, though he already knew every word by heart. The fading light touched the ink, making it glow. "If I don't come back, tell Mike he did everything right. He was the heart of our team. If he ever blames himself, tell him he was worth saving." Michael read it aloud this time, voice steady, soft. "He was worth saving," he murmured. Then, with a small smile, he added, "We all were." The wind carried the words down the hill toward the lake, scattering them like prayer ashes. Elena stepped out, a blanket draped around her shoulders. "Talking to him again?" she asked. "Always," Michael said. She sat beside him, slipped her hand into his. "You know," she whispered, "I think he'd be proud of this place, of you." He looked at her, eyes creased by both laughter and memory. "Of us," he corrected gently. She nodded. "And we still are," she said. Her head rested against his shoulder as the first evening star appeared, trembling above the ridge. The bell tower from the rebuilt church chimed 6 times, its echoes soft across the water. The sound reminded Michael of that night, of rain, fire, and the moment he thought everything had ended. But now, the same bell sounded not as warning, but as blessing. The camera of the world seemed to pull back slowly, the rescue center glowing in twilight, the bell swinging in rhythm with the breeze, the lake mirroring a sky painted with fading light. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching. His gaze turned toward the horizon, where the last flame of sunset met the calm of the lake. The reflection shimmered red and gold, like a fire refusing to die, but choosing instead to warm the night. His tail thumped once against the porch, soft, steady. Michael followed the dog's gaze and smiled. "Some fires burn to destroy," he said quietly. "Others burn to cleanse, and in their ashes, grace finds its way home." Elena looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the glow. For a moment they simply sat there, 3 souls bound not by what they'd lost, but by what they'd chosen to rebuild. The wind carried the last echo of the bell across Pine Brook Valley. It lingered, not mourning, not warning, just a song of grace for those who had survived. When the storms of life pass, what remains is not what we lost, but what grace has quietly left behind. Maybe every scar, every tear was never meant to break us, but to bring us closer to God and to the kindness He planted in one another. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Seal Dog Stories. These tales aren't just about heroes and dogs. They're reminders that faith still heals, love still saves, and miracles still find their way home. May God bless you tonight, bring peace to your heart, and light to your path. We'll meet again in the next story.